Now, let me tell you something about the smartest people I have ever watched grow food. They don't buy fertilizer. They don't buy pest spray. They don't buy soil amendments, seed starters, irrigation systems, or any of the other things that gardening stores have convinced modern people they absolutely cannot live without. They spend nothing, and they grow more food than families twice their size with budgets 10 times larger. I am talking about the Amish. And before anybody tells me that's an old-fashioned way of doing things, child, please. Old-fashioned is just another word for proven. Everything they told you was outdated about growing food. The methods they replaced it with are now poisoning the soil, poisoning the water, and poisoning the people eating what comes out of the ground. The experts who designed modern industrial gardening have not produced healthier families or better food. They have produced bigger profits for the companies selling the inputs. The Amish never bought that argument, and their gardens show it every single season. Let me show you what they do, and what it costs, which is nothing. First, they feed the soil, not the plant, and they use what the barn already makes. They told you that fertilizer comes in a bag, that you go to the store in spring, you buy the bag with the numbers on it, you follow the instructions, and that's how you feed a garden. The people who told you that are selling you the bag. I want you to think about something. A single horse produces between 15 and 20 kilograms of manure every single day. Every day. That is not a problem to be managed. That is a resource being generated on a daily basis, free of charge, by an animal that is also working your land and requiring no electricity to operate. One horse, 1 year, roughly 18 tons of the finest soil amendment available on this earth. And here is what that manure does that the bag cannot. It does not just feed the plant. It feeds the soil. There is a difference. A profound difference, and it is the secret underneath everything the Amish understand about growing food. The microbiome of your soil, that's just a fancy word for the billions of living creatures in every handful of healthy dirt, the bacteria, the fungi, the invisible community that makes nutrients available to plant roots. That microbiome is what your garden actually runs on. Chemical fertilizers feed the plant directly, bypassing that community entirely. And over time they kill it. Slowly, quietly. The soil gets dependent and weak, the same way a person gets weak when they stop doing anything for themselves. Manure feeds the community. It gives those billions of living things something to work with. They digest it slowly, release nutrients gradually, and build the kind of rich, dark, crumbling soil that holds water like a sponge and grows roots like you wouldn't believe. My grandmother composted manure behind the barn in a pile that had been going since before she arrived on that property. She added to it every day. She took from it every spring. That pile was as important to the farm as the well was, and it cost nothing because the animals were already there.
You may not have a horse,
but you might have a neighbor who does. The Amish will tell you, and this is the truth, that one of the best resources in any rural community is a farmer with more manure than garden space. Go find that farmer. Bring a bucket. Ask nicely. You will not be turned away. Second, composting at temperature. The Amish way that actually works. They told you composting was simple. Just pile things up and wait. Eventually it becomes soil. Be patient. And that is not wrong exactly, but it is slow. And slow composting done carelessly produces something mediocre at best and a weed seed nightmare at worst. The Amish compost at heat, and this changes everything. A properly built compost pile, the right balance of brown material and green material turned regularly, kept moist but not wet, will reach 60 to 70 degrees Celsius in its center. That is hot enough to kill every weed seed in the pile. Hot enough to destroy most pathogens. Hot enough to break down even woody stems and tough stalks into finished compost in 8 to 12 weeks instead of a year or more. The ratio matters. 30 parts brown to 1 part green. Browns are your dry carbon materials. Dead leaves you raked up in fall, straw, dried stems, shredded paper, wood chips. Greens are your nitrogen materials, kitchen scraps, fresh grass clippings, fresh manure, coffee grounds. Too much green and the pile goes sour and smells like something you don't want near your garden. Too much brown and it barely decomposes at all, just sits there looking like a pile of yard waste. Get the ratio right. Turn it every week to push oxygen into the centre. Keep it as moist as a wrung-out sponge and watch it heat up. When I was keeping a big garden in my 50s and 60s, I had 3 compost bins running at once. One being filled, one actively cooking, one finished and ready to use. That rotation meant I always had finished compost available. Always. From material that was kitchen scraps and garden waste 3 months before. The Amish do this because they understand that the soil is a living system that needs feeding, and the best food for it is already being generated by everything else happening on the property. Nothing leaves the farm. Everything cycles back. That is not old-fashioned. That is the most sophisticated agricultural thinking there is. Third, seeds saved from the best plant, not bought from the best package. Now this is the one that I want you to sit with for a moment. They have spent decades engineering seeds that cannot reproduce reliably. Hybrid seeds that produce one spectacular crop, and then, if you try to save and replant from them, give you something completely different and inferior. They designed it that way on purpose, so you would have to come back and buy more seeds every single year. That is a business model disguised as plant breeding. The Amish never accepted it. Every autumn before the first frost, Amish families go through their gardens with intention. They are not just harvesting food. They are selecting the future of their garden. The tomato that produced most abundantly. The bean plant that stood up through the August heat when others wilted. The squash that resisted the powdery mildew that touched everything around it. Those are the plants they save seeds from. Not the prettiest plants. The strongest ones. The ones that performed best under the actual conditions of that actual garden. And here is what happens over generations of that selection. The seeds become adapted, genuinely adapted to that specific soil, that specific climate, those specific challenges. A tomato variety that has been grown on the same Amish farm for 50 years is not the same tomato it was when it arrived. It has been quietly shaped by 50 rounds of selection into something that belongs to that place. Something that no seed catalogue can sell you because it only exists there. I have a bean variety that came from my mother's garden. She got it from her mother. I don't know how far back it goes before that. What I know is that those beans come up reliably in my soil, in my climate, with my particular drainage situation, better than anything I have ever ordered from a catalogue. They remember where they came from, and every year I save the best ones to plant again. For storage, beans, corn and squash seeds go into paper envelopes. Paper breathes and keeps moisture from building up. Tomatoes and peppers go into small glass jars with a pinch of dry rice or a small silica packet to absorb any humidity. Label everything. Name, year, which plant it came from if you're tracking performance. Store in a cool, dark, dry place, away from temperature swings. My grandmother kept hers in a tin box on a shelf in the root cellar. One tomato plant can give you hundreds of seeds. Hundreds. Free seeds. For years. From one plant. Why are you buying them every spring? Fourth, watering deep and infrequently. The method that builds strong roots. Here is something that surprises people. The Amish do not water every day. Most of their gardens get watered twice a week at most, sometimes less. And those plants are stronger and more drought-resistant than anything watered daily by an automatic system. The reason is root depth, and it is simple once you understand it. When you water a little every day, the moisture stays near the surface. The roots follow the moisture because that is what roots do. They grow toward water. Surface water means surface roots. And surface roots are fragile roots, vulnerable to heat, to drought, to any disturbance of the top layer of soil. When you water deeply and infrequently, really soaking the soil down 8, 10, 12 inches, the moisture goes deep. The roots follow it down. Deep roots can access water during dry spells when the surface has been baked dry for weeks. Deep roots hold the plant steady. Deep roots find mineral reserves that surface roots never reach. Amish gardens water in the morning. Always morning, before the heat of the day can steal the moisture through evaporation before it reaches the roots. And they water at the base of the plant, not on the leaves, never on the leaves, because wet foliage at night is an invitation to fungal disease that can destroy a crop in days. They use gravity where they can. Barrels elevated on simple wooden platforms, filled from roof runoff when it rains, allowing water to flow through buried lines or simple hoses to garden beds without a pump, without electricity, without a water bill. 1 inch of rain on a modest roof generates hundreds of gallons. The Amish catch it. The rest of us watch it run down the driveway. Set up even a single barrel under your downspout this season. It costs almost nothing if you find a used food-grade barrel, which you can often get free from restaurants or food processing operations. That stored water will carry your garden through dry spells that would otherwise have you hauling from the tap every evening. 5th, companion planting, the garden that protects itself. They sold you pesticides by convincing you that pest control required chemicals, that there was no other reliable way, that the alternative was watching your crops get eaten and your season ruined. The Amish have been managing pests without a single bottle of spray for generations, and they do it by understanding that a garden is not a collection of individual plants. It is a community, and like any community, the right neighbours make everything safer. Marigolds planted throughout the vegetable beds release compounds from their roots that repel nematodes, the microscopic worms that attack root systems, and their scent confuses and deters aphids and whiteflies above ground. They are not decorative, they are working. Basil planted beside tomatoes confuses the hornworm moth, which lays the eggs that become those devastating caterpillars. The strong aromatic compounds mask the scent signals the moths use to locate their preferred host plants. Same tomatoes. Different neighbour, dramatically different pest pressure. Nasturtiums planted at the edges of beds act as trap crops. Aphids prefer them to most vegetables and cluster there instead of on your food plants. You let the nasturtiums take the hit. Your beans and squash stay clean. And then nasturtiums go in the salad anyway, so nothing is wasted. The 3 sisters planting, I've talked about before, corn, beans and squash together, is the same principle extended further. Each plant benefits the others. The corn shelters the beans. The beans fix nitrogen for the corn and squash. The squash shades the ground, holds moisture, and its prickly stems deter ground-dwelling pests from moving through the bed. The Amish don't fight their gardens. They design them so the garden largely defends itself. That is not lazy. That is intelligent. 6th, cover cropping in fall, feeding the soil while it rests. Now this is the one that most modern gardeners skip entirely. And it is the one that explains why Amish gardens get more productive every year, instead of wearing out the way most gardens do after 5 or 6 seasons. When the growing season ends, most people clean out their beds and leave the soil bare through the fall and winter. Bare soil loses nutrients through rain erosion. It compacts. It loses the biological activity that makes it productive. It goes backward. The Amish plant cover crops: crimson clover, winter rye, hairy vetch. These are not food crops. They are soil crops. They grow through the cool season, protecting the surface from erosion, and they do something remarkable underground. Clover and vetch are legumes, and legumes have a relationship with specific soil bacteria that allows them to capture nitrogen directly from the air and fix it into the soil in a form plant roots can use. Free nitrogen from the air. Delivered into your garden beds over winter so that when spring comes and you turn that cover crop under, you are releasing a flush of nutrients that cost you nothing but a handful of seed in September. Winter rye, meanwhile, grows an extensive root system that physically breaks up compaction, creates channels for water and oxygen to move through the soil, and when turned under in spring, adds massive amounts of organic matter. The Amish do not till these crops under with heavy machinery. They crimp them down with a roller, or simply lay cardboard over them in late winter, killing them with darkness so that they decompose in place, feeding the soil from the top down without disturbing the living community underneath. Not tilling is important. Every time you turn soil deeply, you destroy the fungal networks, called mycorrhizae, which is just a fancy word for the underground thread system that connects plant roots and helps them share water and nutrients. You destroy those networks and set the soil biology back. The Amish understood through generations of observation that the less you disturb the soil, the better it performs. Modern no-till agriculture is only now catching up to what those communities never stopped doing. Seventh, the community work ethic. Nobody gardens alone. And now I want to tell you the thing that no gardening book fully captures, because you cannot buy it and you cannot replicate it alone. The Amish do not garden as isolated households competing with each other. They garden as a community sharing with each other. When it is planting time, multiple families work together. What would take one person 2 weeks takes a group of 8 one long Saturday. The work becomes an occasion. There is food, there is conversation, there is laughter, there is the particular satisfaction of doing hard physical work alongside people you trust. When someone discovers that a particular combination repels a pest they've all been struggling with, that knowledge spreads through the community by the following week. Nobody patents it. Nobody sells it. It just becomes what everyone knows and everyone does. When a family has a hard year, illness, an unexpected loss, a season that went wrong for reasons nobody could control, the community fills the gap. Extra jars from one family's cellar. Extra labour at planting time. Extra seed from someone's surplus. That is not just generosity. That is a system. A resilient system that survives the hard years that isolated households do not survive alone. I think about my own garden, and I think about all the years I worked it with my children nearby, with neighbours stopping by, with my church women sharing cuttings and divisions and advice that came from 40 years of paying attention to this particular soil in this particular place. That knowledge lives in community. It does not transfer fully in a book or a video. It transfers person to person in the garden, with your hands in the same dirt. Find your community. Grow alongside people. Share your seeds, your knowledge, your harvest. Accept help when your season is hard. Offer it when someone else's is. Now, let me tell you what all of this really is, because I could give you the techniques all day. The manure, the compost, the saved seeds, the companion planting, the cover crops. All of it true. All of it useful. All of it something you can start doing this season without spending a single dollar. But the Amish are not productive gardeners simply because they have good techniques. They are productive gardeners because they understand that the garden is not separate from life. It is not a hobby. It is not a weekend project. It is part of the whole, woven into every season, every day, every relationship in the community. They tend it the way you tend anything you genuinely cannot afford to lose. And I think that is the deeper lesson for all of us. We have outsourced so much. Our food, our medicine, our community, our knowledge of how things grow and how things work. We handed all of it over to systems that were happy to take it and charge us for it back in pieces. The Amish never handed it over, not because they are backward, because they understood something that takes most people a lifetime to learn. What you grow yourself feeds you differently than what you buy. Not just in your body, in your spirit. There is something that happens when you put a seed in the ground and watch it become food that no grocery store transaction can replicate. It is a kind of gratitude that doesn't require effort. It just arrives naturally when you understand your own place in the cycle of things. My grandmother knew this. Her hands were in the soil every season of her life. She never had much money. She never needed much money. The garden gave her what money was supposed to provide and gave it with a generosity that no market could match. Spend nothing. Grow everything. Trust the soil, trust the seed, trust the community, trust the Lord who designed the whole system to work without our improvements. Now, I have seeds to sort before the light goes.